going on with that franchise. Megan Imbert, former Emmy Award-winning production manager of what is now Washington's Commanders, joins us on Sikkim 365 Radio, 365 Sports, and she's been one of the most outspoken participants in the Washington culture investigation. Megan, why is this such a passionate thing for you?
Thanks for having me, first of all. This is so passionate for me because this is a workplace issue across America, really. And the NFL is such a prominent, pinnacle part of our society. And there's things that we're uncovering outside of just the cheerleaders, but, the sexual harassment and other things, and some direct allegations to Washington Commander owner Dan Snyder. And we can't allow these moments to continue to pass and cover up and have settlements. We need accountability. We need transparency. We need our society to evolve. So from my perspective, this is so much bigger than me. It's bigger than the Washington football team. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really glad you're having me on your show today.
It all starts at the top, every organization. And in every owner can think that they're doing things and that they have levels to protect them. But this happens a lot with Washington. You experience it from working there. What is the problem from Dan Snyder on down that this keeps happening? It happens so badly and nobody did anything about it.
Yeah, so what we've discovered through a 10-month-long investigation was that this culture really permeated from the top on down. We have direct allegations against him, and then also there's these 2 explicit cheerleader videos that I believe were ordered by him for production, which is a separate terrible crime. And then from there, this has just permeated for the past 20 years. And when I saw the Jerry Jones Dallas Cowboys story yesterday, it really just struck a chord with me where it was like, wow, how are these teams allowed to investigate themselves? And especially a situation where this was like Jerry Jones's right-hand person. So from my perspective, there's a lot that the league could be doing differently. And as we had this independent investigation in Washington, we just found out after the congressional roundtable that the NFL had a common interest agreement with the Washington Commanders. So none of the findings of our investigation will be revealed without Dan Snyder's consent, which is just appalling. It's insulting to all of our intelligences. And everything ranged from, harassment to, we now know Tiffany Johnston's story of Dan Snyder literally having his hand on her thigh and trying to push her into a limousine, him having parties or a certain party in Aspen with prostitutes. And of course, I know about these videos of cheerleaders, and it's just this total abuse of power. And frankly, the NFL has continued to run unchecked, and they have these bylaws and all these other things. But, whether it be what's happening, with this cheerleader scandal and settlements, the Washington culture investigation, to Brian Flores, it's just this culture that has been rooted in greed, power, and intimidation that has been left unchecked.
Megan, when it comes to all the young women, everybody involved who's voiced their concerns or voiced their allegations and what happened, do they feel like they're even being heard? Because I know the stories are coming out, but obviously nothing's being done. And I was just curious of I don't know, that's got to be kind of a helpless feeling, like screaming into the abyss almost.
I appreciate the question. It has been a very long 19 months, but I have hope because Congress is involved. And, our hope now, obviously the NFL had until February 14th to provide documents over to Congress. So I'm sure they're sifting through whatever they received. In my book, if the Beth Wilkinson report is not in there, then it's not sufficient for me. So I do feel heard by Congress. And as far as I can say, that's as far as we can go in our system to try to uncover what's really going on. And the Oversight Committee has subpoena power. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. My hope is that they'll have a hearing. I hope we'll see Dan Snyder, Roger Goodell, and even Beth Wilkinson subpoenaed.
All right, and here's what happens a lot of times because of just the culture or the way people look at any kind of allegations of sexual harassment. And as you know, Megan, we cover Baylor athletics, and they had their own dark clouds that hung around for a while as well, and they've had to pay for it in many different ways. But a lot of times you hear this flippantly, and I'm not saying this myself, but okay, what's in it for you? And you and I talked about this earlier today. There's nothing really in this for you other than you want the truth out there, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm laughing because some people are like, are you crazy? You're going up against a billionaire, multi-billion dollar enterprise, the NFL. We don't have an active lawsuit. We've never been in this for any kind of money. And I think that's what is also probably catching Dan Snyder off guard, is that money is the language he speaks. And we literally are just trying to get the truth out there and have some accountability in order to see both the Washington football culture change, the rest of the NFL, and then ultimately working with Congress, there could be legislation that actually could impact the American workforce.
Yeah, that makes you guys dangerous to billionaires when you have no interest in going away for a prize. I mean, that's the cure-all. Well, how much does this take to go away?
Exactly.
Well, if there was never a dollar amount, then it makes it really hard. Are you surprised, because this is not the NFL's first dance with a toxic workplace and an owner? When you look back at Jerry Richardson and the Carolina Panthers, they forced him to sell. David Tepper owns that team now. It's completely different. Why is Dan Snyder more protected than Jerry Richardson seemed to be?
It's a wonderful question, and I think it's one that everyone's starting to really ask, especially based on the allegations that are out there. And if he is innocent, then why does he have an issue and isn't allowing the Beth Wilkinson report to be released? So his actions are proving otherwise, and I'm not sure, in Texas, if everybody listens to the Washington Post or reads it, but, they did an article on Dan Snyder's actual interference in the investigation, including the use of private investigators, tampering with witnesses. There's a $1.6 million settlement directly a sexual misconduct thing related to him that they ended up going after Beth Wilkinson for her trying to find out what that was. So it is mind-boggling, and I think this is where one of the things that, I don't want to spread rumors, but it has my head kind of thinking, well, Pro Football Talk talked about at the Super Bowl, some of these owners are not aligning to Dan Snyder anymore. Is Jerry Jones one of them? Is that why we're seeing what we saw this week? I don't know. It's bizarre to me. And I mean, we're talking about a multi-billionaire. So who knows what he knows about other people. And right now with the common interest agreement, it definitely feels like the NFL and the Commanders have worked together to cover up, and we were completely misled in our investigation. None of us would have participated had we not thought that this was above board and it would actually result in positive change.
Megan, I have to ask this question. You have been very outspoken. Sure. I mean, you have not held back anything. Has anyone ever contacted you and told you to shut up?
I can't really speak to that.
Okay.
But certainly, I'm sure they're not happy with my outspokenness. And the irony is that when I started out at the team in 2006, I was in the media relations department. So I built a lot of relationships with the local DC area media, a lot of which either still cover the team or they're now at a national level. So when this all happened, it's just really serendipitous that I already had good working relationships with some of the press corps. So I had to make it up in my mind before I went on record that I knew that there would be risks involved, and for me, like I said, this is much bigger than myself, and I wouldn't be able to sleep at night knowing what I know and not doing what I could to get the truth out there. And hopefully, it took me a second. Originally, I was going to go anonymously, and then I decided to go on record. And I know that I've helped inspire other people to come forward. And that's all I could ask for, is that it's providing people some strength to tell their stories.
Is the NFL maybe one of the best vehicles to be able to tell the story of toxic workplaces and sexual harassment, because it's hard for anybody who's not directly involved in the football world, ex-players, coaches, people who do that. So women have always going to have had a hard time breaking into the NFL or having equal say or things like that in that league. For people to kind of understand, like, yeah, this is really hard and difficult, and maybe apply it to their own workplace.
Yeah, for sure. And I also look at the NFL as almost a microcosm of society. Like, we see the conversations around racism and, the lack of diversity, et cetera. And I'm not calling for cancel culture. I'm calling for the culture to evolve. A lot of times I think people are watching us and seeing how many hoops we're having to jump through, to the question earlier on people just listening to us and believing us. Like, we have no reason, I'm more than 10 years past working there, to bring forward, my stories without it's exhausting. And it's also, I want to make sure that there's positive change so that people can feel comfortable coming forward, because it is very scary. And then there's also the use of NDAs in the workforce, which I know Congress is working towards, some legislation perhaps around the use of those and when it's appropriate and when it's not. There's a number of people that have not been able to speak up because of that. So, unfortunately, that's a way that people can kind of silence folks. And they might be silencing them and they're aware of crime or other inappropriate behaviors.
You worked with the Redskins, now the Commanders. You were 19 years old, media relations intern, left at the age of 25. You were, again, an Emmy Award-winning production manager. Larry Michaels was your boss. He recently, in the last few years, was involved in a story. In fact, he resigned as well. And I'm not asking you to say anything you can't say, but when you see that, and then you saw the story yesterday about Rich Dalrymple, 32 years with the franchise, and all of a sudden he is the one that had to resign, and it was only after things started popping. Do you see any similarities?
Absolutely. I mean, to put it in perspective, yesterday when I saw that article, I couldn't eat until like 5:30. Like, that was when I had my lunch. And every time a story like this breaks, it does have an emotional toll on some of us. And I'm sure, the cheerleaders are involved. And I've been the first one to call out, and it's not a simple situation. I care about Larry Michael. I've known him since I was 19 years old. However, at the same time, he was allowed to retire. Dan Snyder allowed him to retire. He should have been fired. And when I read that, and to see that this was Jerry Jones' right-hand person and was allowed to continue working there and then, suddenly retires, it's like, this has got to stop, because the people that are in positions of power, the ones that are supposed to actually be looking out and doing the right thing and protecting people, are, in these cases, the ones that are contributing to the problem.
Megan, do you think that they will be able to release that report ever, or do you think that Dan Snyder has already done what he needs to do to put the kibosh on it?
I mean, I'm going to do whatever I can to get the findings of that report released. I will not be quiet about it. I hope we don't have to go through, a reinvestigation. I think that's incredibly an unfair ask if they decide they want to do that. But I believe there's a report. The original documentation that Congress shared with the NFL was, hey, the original ask here was a written report. And then when the NFL got involved, they asked for an oral report. It's a complete smack in the face to all of us. You have Deflategate, a 243-page written report about the PSI of game balls. And then we have 120 to 150 people, men and women. And this is clearly, it's not just a cheerleader issue. This is a males were bullied in the workplace. Women were treated terribly too. So it's full on the toxic culture. I think we definitely deserve to see what those findings had to say. So I'm really hopeful that, Congress can figure it out. And, I'm not a lawyer, but I want somebody to figure out how we can get the findings released. And the most terrible part, there's two things during the past 19 months that really impacted me, was when the investigation was going on, Roger Goodell and a few of those owners allowed for Dan Snyder to become even more powerful with 100% ownership while there's an active investigation going on about him. That's completely irresponsible. and then this other whole common interest agreement and all of that. It's just, I want to have hope that we can live in a society that, will hold people accountable.
We experienced it a little bit here when Baylor said there wasn't a written report from Pepper Hamilton, which is, or Pepper Hamilton said there wasn't a written report, wherever it was. But it's kind of hard to believe that you pay lawyers all this money and they just have to memorize things.
Well, the second part I was going to say was the day that Roger Goodell actually had the audacity to say he wasn't going to release any findings because he was protecting all of us. When we actually had a couple people go to New York City to that owners meeting, hand delivering letters, and he had the audacity to say he's not releasing findings because of us, and he's trying to protect us, when in fact he had a backdoor agreement with Dan Snyder.
Dirty. Yeah. Megan, for those who are not following this story very closely, maybe they start to now, but what's kind of the next step in this process in terms of everything that's going on? What's kind of the next thing to be looking towards, if that makes sense?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a couple things. We're seeing fans in D.C. and across the league starting to take more action. There's a couple fans, third-generation fans, started a website called boycottdan.com, basically going after all the sponsors. You can put in your email address, and it's basically trying to get them to cut ties with Dan. We saw that with the name change. And so there's that going on in the background, but then separately, right now, we're going to wait and see what Congress wants to do as far as if they're going to set a hearing, if they're going to do subpoenas. A few of us, we've been at Congress's disposal in the background anytime they want to meet with us. And we're going to be happy to continue to brief people to be prepared in the event there's a hearing.
Megan, we appreciate you, and also you and I. We can stay in touch, and obviously a lot more. I'll ask you this, and we appreciate your time again. Do you feel like that yesterday's story involving the Cowboys and Rich Dalrymple is just a needle in a haystack for that organization?
Based on what I've experienced within Washington, probably. And I know, I can't make assumptions, but
sure,
there are even some former employees tweeting about, oh, my experiences were terrible. And I'm like, please speak up. Now's the time to speak up. And if anyone wants to reach out to me and they're scared to do it, find me on Twitter. I'm happy to put you in touch with people so that you can do this anonymously. And I think right now, the time is now. We need to uncover what's really gone on in some of these organizations, and we can't let this moment pass by. Yeah, everybody deserves to work in a workplace, really free from this terrible behavior. And we've gotten the criticism. We want to watch football. We want to escape from this, but there's people involved here. This is not okay.
Megan Imbert, again, at Megan Imbert, exactly how you say it, MEGANIMBERT on Twitter if you'd like to contact her. And if you would like to contact her and you don't do Twitter, then you can text us 254-339-1122. Megan, I know it's sometimes when you're taking what it looks like you're trying to climb Mount Kilimanjaro legally and all the other things as well, it is not easy. We appreciate your time and good luck with you going forward and your cause.
Thank you for having me. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, you too. Megan Imbert. The part, and I will get an email, a text message, or direct message from somebody. Okay, what is she getting out of it? What does she want in return? And when someone like this who's taking this on, who could probably get $1 million check or whatever, says it's about the issue and it's about that to me shouldn't have to answer that question anyway. But when I talked to her, and we've been through this, I asked her, I said, so, okay, why you? And she's not the only one. That doesn't mean if she would have, that doesn't mean I'm questioning her, but I think it's always something you want to ask when it comes to this. And she's doing a lot of radio appearances, and she doesn't have to. She could just curl up and take $1 million check.
Well, and there were so many weird things that have happened the last couple of years with Washington. Fred Smith.
I wanted to ask her about the RG3 time.
Yeah, Fred Smith and FedEx. They're jumped out of it. The ownership, they divested their ownership and gave it back and sold it back to Dan Snyder, and the NFL just let it happen so quickly. When it's so strange, given that. They went through this with Jerry Richardson, and the thing about Jerry Richardson, I know there was more to it than that, but what eventually pushed that down the line was just a Sports Illustrated expose. So a Sports Illustrated expose pushes that down the line, but all of this stuff about Washington doesn't on Dan Snyder, and it doesn't make any sense at all.
We will have a guest tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Some of you may remember him. He is a brilliant writer. He wrote the book 12 Mighty Orphans. He wrote the book about the Junction Boys. He's written other books as well. His name is Jim Dent. He's been in prison, and he should have been in prison. He had some major legal issues, driving, DUIs, multiple, but he's out of prison, and he's writing a book called The Angry Writer. He's going to join us. He's written books about the Cowboys, and we're going to talk a little bit about this with him as well tomorrow. Jim Dent will join us tomorrow at 5 o'clock here on Sikkim 365 Radio. Armstrong, would you show the video that I